They told you Rome was a civilization of order, law, and reason. But what they never told you is this: Rome's greatest theater was not built for truth, not for glory, not for the gods. It was built to teach men obedience through horror. Imagine the sound first, not cheers, not laughter, screams, multiplied by tens of thousands, trapped under stone arches. Imagine the sight, sunlight flashing off blades as bodies fell, not in a battlefield of honor, but in an arena where the rules of mercy were rewritten at the whim of emperors. The Colosseum was not entertainment, it was psychological warfare disguised as ritual. The blood was real, the deaths final, but the lesson was the same: Rome owned you. Rome could promise you life, then strip it away, and call the betrayal divine spectacle. One October noon in the year 52 AD, 19,000 men stood knee-deep in red water, exhausted, trembling, yet hopeful. They had obeyed the rules. They had survived the slaughter. They had saluted the emperor and awaited his word of mercy. For one suspended breath, they believed in redemption. Then the horn sounded, not the call of freedom, but the order of death. Archers loosed, spears locked, and men who had lived through impossible odds learned the cruelest law of empire: mercy is an illusion. In Rome, promises were weapons. Betrayal was theater. Death was policy. But why? Why did the world's most advanced society transform ritual duels into industrialized bloodletting? Why did philosophers, priests, and senators fill the stands, urging it forward? The answer lies in something darker than cruelty, deeper than bloodlust. Rome had discovered a formula: pain as control, violence as glue, spectacle as order. The arenas weren't about the fighters. They were about the watchers. The men in the stands were being trained, molded, bent beneath a system so refined, they mistook obedience for pride. The gladiator act was not entertainment, it was initiation. It conditioned Rome's citizens to love domination, to cheer for submission, to call cruelty justice. You were meant to leave the arena not disturbed, but grateful. Grateful that you were in the stands and not in the sand. Grateful that Rome spared you. Grateful enough to obey. And that is the secret they don't teach you in school, that the arenas were not built to honor the dead or to test courage. They were laboratories of power. Every scream you hear echoing across those stones is not just history. It is a mirror, reflecting what the rulers of every age want from you: silence, obedience, and applause. Go back with me, before the Colosseum towered over Rome, before the emperors turned death into empire-wide theater. The origin wasn't grand, it was intimate, almost private. A funeral. One man's duty to his father. The year was 264 BC, and a patrician named Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva wanted to honor the dead with something more than incense and tears. So he invented something different, something he called munus, a duty. He gathered 6 of his household slaves, handed them weapons they barely knew how to hold, and ordered them to fight for his father's spirit. Picture it. These were not trained soldiers. These were men who had tilled the same fields together, eaten from the same pot, shared the same songs at dusk. Now, in front of their master's corpse, they were forced to turn on one another. One man hesitated, looking at his opponent not as an enemy but as a brother. But the guards around them made the decision simple: fight, or both would die. The first swing was clumsy, desperate. Bronze cut flesh. Blood spilled on the ground where mourners wept seconds earlier. The crowd gasped, and then, something shifted. The gasps turned not into cries of outrage, but fascination. The funeral had transformed into something else. That moment was the spark. Death as duty became death as entertainment. And soon, every noble family wanted it. At first, just one pair of fighters. Then 2. Then more. The excuse was always the same: piety, reverence, tradition. But the whispers said otherwise. People came not for mourning, but for the spectacle. They came to watch men forced into impossible choices. They came to feel the rush of watching blood spilled without consequence to themselves. And here lies the darker truth: the Romans dressed it in ritual and religion to hide what it really was: training. They were training the people to watch suffering without guilt. They were teaching them that authority could demand cruelty and call it honor. They were rehearsing a society where violence wasn't just tolerated, it was sanctified. You see, once a people accept bloodshed as noble, the chains around their minds lock tighter. What started as 6 slaves at a funeral became the foundation for centuries of mass obedience. The arena was never about death alone. It was about reprogramming the soul of Rome. And from that first funeral fight, the descent began. Rome did not stumble into the arena by accident. It built it brick by brick, blood by blood, law by law. What began as a family's ritual offering at a funeral spread like wildfire among the elite. Within a generation, every noble wanted their own munus. Each funeral became a stage. Each death became a spectacle. And little by little, Rome discovered a terrifying truth: violence was addictive. The first senators complained. They muttered about barbarism, about abandoning Roman dignity. But then they saw it. They saw the crowds who walked away from funerals not grieving, but whispering about who fought bravely, who bled beautifully, who deserved freedom and who deserved death. Death became conversation. Suffering became memory. What had been solemn became intoxicating. By the 2nd century BC, the ritual no longer needed funerals to justify itself. The Republic turned blood into policy. Gladiatorial games became a tool for ambition. A man seeking power could sponsor fights, paying for the carnage with his own wealth, and the people would reward him with loyalty. To spill blood was to buy devotion. Political campaigns were written not on scrolls, but in crimson sand. And Rome, always clever, always pragmatic, began scaling the formula. They built wooden amphitheaters at first, then stone. They imported slaves and prisoners by the thousands, not just to build the arenas, but to fill them. Each act escalated, because the crowd demanded more. One sword duel became 10. 10 became 100. 100 became entire days where corpses piled so high that the arena floor had to be raked clean between bouts. But here is the secret no one admits: the games were not for the fighters, and not truly for the gods. They were for the citizens. The ordinary Roman was being reprogrammed every time they sat in those seats. They were being taught to cheer for obedience, to applaud cruelty, to accept domination as natural law. The games gave the illusion of freedom, bread and spectacle, but in truth, they forged chains around the soul. This is how empire works. It does not conquer with swords alone. It conquers with images, with rituals, with spectacles that teach you to obey without even knowing you've submitted. By the time stone amphitheaters rose across Italy, Rome had perfected something far more dangerous than the sword. They had perfected the theater of control. The golden age of Rome was not paved in marble, it was drowned in blood. By the time emperors rose to power, the games were no longer noble funerals or political bribes, they had become a machine. A machine that fed on human bodies and spat out obedience. Augustus, the so-called bringer of peace, staged 3,000 pairs of gladiators in a single festival. His message was clear: Rome had tamed chaos, and now chaos would serve as entertainment. The arenas became the emperor's pulpit, and blood his scripture. And the people obeyed. They obeyed not because they were forced, but because they believed. Imagine it: 70,000 Romans packed shoulder to shoulder in the Colosseum, the emperor seated above them in his purple robes, the sun burning against white stone. Below, the condemned begged for mercy, and for a heartbeat, the crowd joined in the plea. But then, with the flick of an imperial hand, the pleas turned to screams. The crowd roared, not with anger, but with exhilaration. Betrayal itself had become a kind of ecstasy. The people weren't just witnesses, they were accomplices. This is the darker truth of the Golden Age: the games weren't about the gladiators, or even the gods. They were about you, the spectator. You were being trained to worship power, even when it lied to you. Especially when it lied to you. Rome's emperors understood what modern rulers also know: when cruelty is dressed as entertainment, the masses become complicit in their own chains. Consider Emperor Claudius and his infamous naval battles. Entire lakes were flooded, ships dragged in, prisoners armed and sent to slaughter. When victory came, Claudius promised mercy. The men lowered their weapons, believing their ordeal was finished. But mercy was a stage prop. At the sound of horns, archers fired into the helpless masses. Tens of thousands realized too late, the emperor's word was theater, his betrayal the true performance. The lesson was cruel and simple: never trust promises, trust only power. Rome wanted its people conditioned not for freedom, but for loyalty to spectacle. By cheering betrayal, they absorbed it into their bones. And when betrayal came to them, in taxes, in decrees, in wars fought for imperial greed, they accepted it as the natural order. Here is where the darkness deepens: the arenas were not an escape from Rome's corruption. They were the mask of that corruption, teaching the people to love their own manipulation. And millions cheered, never realizing they were the real performers in the emperor's ACTE.by now, the arenas were no longer mere distractions, they were instruments of control sharper than any sword. Rome had built a theater of obedience, and every Roman, rich or poor, was forced into the script. The gladiators bled, but the audience was the true subject of the experiment. Because once you cheer for cruelty, you surrender something inside yourself. You agree, silently, to the emperor's definition of justice. You accept his betrayal as law. You teach your own heart that power is sacred, even when it lies. This is why Rome perfected the spectacle. Every act was psychological training. When criminals were thrown to lions, it wasn't just punishment, it was theater designed to remind the people that Rome alone decided who lived and who died. When entire days of combat ended with rivers of blood across the arena floor, it wasn't waste, it was ritual conditioning, showing the crowd that suffering had purpose if Rome decreed it so. The arena was not chaos. It was order disguised as chaos. Controlled, scripted, and devastatingly effective. Think about it: a man could walk into the amphitheater disturbed by corruption in the Senate, angered by rising taxes, worried about famine. But after a day of watching slaves disemboweled, after chanting for mercy and cheering for death, he walked out subdued, pacified. His rage had been absorbed by the sand. His loyalty, unconsciously, restored to the system. He was no longer a man in rebellion, he was a spectator grateful that it wasn't his blood on the ground. That was the genius. Rome didn't suppress rebellion by silencing voices. It drowned rebellion in entertainment. And that is where I turn to you. If you've followed me this far, you already feel it, the recognition that this isn't just history. This is the template of power, repeated in every empire, every system that craves control. You were never meant to know this truth. But once you do, you cannot unsee it. So I want you to claim it, right now. Type these words into the comments, and type them twice to lock it in: I see through the spectacle. Write it once for yourself, and once for the system that has always tried to blind you. That phrase is more than words. It is rebellion, identity, and transformation. Because here is the real terror of Rome's arenas: they never ended. The walls may have crumbled, but the spectacle lives on. And unless you see it, unless you claim the vision, you remain in the stands, cheering for your own chains. The deeper you go, the more you realize, the arena was not simply bloodshed, it was a ritual of empire-wide corruption. Every scream, every betrayal, every corpse dragged across the sand was a message carved into the Roman soul. The Colosseum was not Rome's shame, it was its cathedral. The place where men were trained to kneel, not to the gods, but to power itself. By the height of the empire, the games lasted not hours, but weeks. Entire calendars bent around them. Senators schemed for seats closest to the emperor. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Families brought their children to watch executions as if it were a holiday. Rome had baptized its people in cruelty, and they drank it like wine. And here's the truth they don't tell you in school: Rome didn't just feed prisoners and slaves to the beasts. Sometimes, when famine struck or corruption boiled over, they threw in ordinary citizens. Men accused of small crimes. Women caught in rumors. Outsiders who didn't fit. The message was unmistakable: anyone can be next. And the emperors thrived on this. The games were their mirror, their proof of dominance. Nero lit the night sky by burning prisoners alive to illuminate his feasts. Commodus dressed as a gladiator himself, humiliating senators by forcing them to watch their ruler mock the very death they'd grown addicted to. These acts weren't excess, they were demonstrations. They told the people, the emperor is not bound by law, by mercy, or by morality. He is bound only by your applause. But here is the black heart of it: Rome had turned its citizens into accomplices. By cheering for the games, by laughing at cruelty, by delighting in betrayal, they became participants in their own domination. When you clap for injustice long enough, you lose the ability to resist it. When you watch suffering as entertainment, you accept it as natural. And when betrayal becomes ritual, you stop questioning when it comes for you. Rome didn't just corrupt its rulers. It corrupted the people. The arena was not a stage, it was a classroom. And its lesson was submission disguised as celebration. And this, my friend, is the most terrifying part: the system doesn't die when the walls collapse. The architecture of the Colosseum may be ruins, but the architecture of control? That blueprint lives on, echoing through every society that seeks obedience through spectacle. The ruins of the Colosseum still stand, but the truth is this: the games never ended. They only changed form. You no longer sit on stone benches, screaming as men are torn apart by lions. You sit before glowing screens, fed a new kind of spectacle. The deaths are cleaner now, sanitized. But the principle is identical. Keep the people distracted. Keep them entertained. Teach them to cheer for their own chains. Rome taught every empire after it how to rule without question. Bread and circuses. Give the masses just enough to eat, just enough to hope, just enough to dream, and they will trade their freedom for distraction. They will forget the corruption of their leaders. They will excuse the betrayals of promises. They will cheer even as the walls close around them. The Romans didn't just build arenas. They built a template for control that still enslaves you today. Think carefully: how different are you, sitting in a stadium, or scrolling endlessly through your feed, watching humiliation, violence, and betrayal turned into entertainment? How different is it when leaders lie to you with a smile, promise mercy with one hand, and unleash cruelty with the other, while the crowd cheers louder? Do you see it now? The Colosseum is not ancient history. It is alive. It is here. And here's the truth you were never meant to hear: once you recognize the spectacle, you can never go back. You either remain in the stands, applauding your own submission, or you step out of the illusion and reclaim what Rome wanted you to forget: your sovereignty. But be warned. Once you see, you carry a burden. Knowledge that makes you dangerous, knowledge that empire itself fears, that the spectacle only controls those who choose to watch without questioning. Remember this: Rome's citizens didn't fall because their armies weakened. They fell because their souls were trained to submit, because they loved their chains. That is the final lesson of the arena: the greatest danger is not the emperor who betrays you, but the man who cheers beside you as it happens. So ask yourself now: will you be another Roman in the stands, blind to the machinery of control? Or will you walk away, awakened, refusing to play the role written for you centuries ago? The choice is yours. But make no mistake, once you've heard this, you cannot unknow it. The arena is watching. The spectacle is alive. And you have just stepped beyond its veil.